Hello guys. So today is lecture 9. It's our second to last lecture. Next lecture will be mandatory because it'll be the closing ceremony for the hack challenge. But in this lecture I'll be going over CHCR priorities and dynamic table view cells. Just a couple things, to do with auto layout and as well as table views that I thought that we didn't get a chance to go over and I thought was important. So that's that. In terms of announcements, I did post some starter code on the Piazza. So if you guys want to follow along when I do the demos, definitely download that. It's under resources. And then of course your final project submissions are due this Saturday. And remember for this final project, we cannot give extensions because we're working with a one-day turnaround. So we'll be grading all your final projects the following day on Sunday, and so we can choose the ones that won challenges for the closing ceremony on Monday. So definitely make sure you get it done because we cannot give you an extension in this case. And don't forget to also submit a README file and just specify how your app completes each of the requirements. I wrote it down in the hack challenge description, but just reminding everybody. And yeah, so now we'll just go on to review questions. Does anyone have any questions about the hack challenge or anything? Okay. Where are the office hours going to be? Yeah, so the office hours are going to be like Friday and or Saturday. Like, I think I've put my office hours for Friday with Kevin, and I think the rest of the TAs will be arranging the office hours to go with the deadline.
Yeah, and if you want help, you can use the Slack channel just to message your TA and either like ask them if they can meet you, or if you could try to debug over Slack too.
Cool. Okay, so now we're going to do a couple of review questions. So last lecture we learned about StackViews. So for the first question, so how do you make a stack view like vertical or horizontal? Just give you guys a minute. Yeah, you could probably, just Google it if you wanted to. But does anyone know, or off the top of their heads, what you would do to kind of shift the orientation of the stack view? If you don't know, you can just guess too. That's fine. Okay, well, I'll just, just go over the answers. It's okay, because I also plan to review StackViews as well, just to give you guys a refresher. Anyway, so the answer is the axis property. So the axis property is what you use to make your stack view vertical and horizontal. And like what I mean by that is, so when I say a vertical stack view, I mean a stack view that stacks each of its arranged subviews vertically. And then when I say a horizontal stack view, I'm talking about a stack view which stacks its arranged subviews just on the horizontal line. So that's what the axis property does, and this is kind of like the visual you guys should have when you think of a vertical stack view and a horizontal stack view. And then the arranged subviews of a stack view are kind of like equivalent to a subview of a view. It's like all the little stacks within the stack view. And if you want to add something to your stack view, you have to do .add arranged subview. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Oh yeah. And then so the next question is, what are some properties of stack views? Yes, that is correct. So all of these are properties of a stack view, and I'll go over what they all mean, just so because these are not obviously all the properties of the stack views, but these are definitely the most important when it comes to arranging your views using a stack view. So basically just like the gist of what alignment versus distribution versus spacing. So these are kind of like the main properties of the stack view, not including axis, which obviously directs how your stack view is oriented. But so basically what alignment is kind of like tells you like perpendicular to the axis, right? So if you're, how are the my arranged subviews arranged? And then your distribution is kind of like along the axis. So it's like saying like along the axis, how are my arranged subviews arranged, right? And then spacing is just like, it's the minimum spacing between arranged subviews. So it's kind of similar to like collection views where you like, I think you specify spacing and whatnot, but just basically just like the minimum amount of space that you would want between your different subviews. And like there are different types of alignments. So this picture is, I feel like, pretty good at describing them because of course I could just say them with words, but picture is 1,000 words, and I feel like this picture really brings to light what every alignment is. Especially like what's nice is like you guys can see like both for a vertical and a horizontal stack view, like what does an alignment do really, and so you can kind of see an alignment kind of dictates like where it falls kind of in the y direction for like a horizontal stack view, so like the top picture. And then the alignment kind of dictates how things are laid out like on the x-axis for like vertical stack view. So these are just like, if you want to align your view, like just have all your arranged subviews be like left aligned, you just do leading. If you want them to be right aligned, you do trailing. That's kind of like what you should think about when you do alignment. And the default is fill, so if you just create a stack view and you don't specify a property, it's just going to be like fill. Like it's just going to like just basically fill each element's going to just stretch to fill the entire space of the stack view. So that's what that is. And then does anyone have questions on alignment? Yeah, I'll probably just go over all like these basic properties, and then I guess I can take questions after that. And the distribution is kind of like how, you can think about how wide or tall things will be. So like kind of for the vertical one, right, it kind of says like, how big do I want each element? Or like how tall do I want each element, right? And so you can kind of see that the default is fill, so it'll automatically try and kind of fill. I'll kind of go over more specifically what fill does for distribution, but like basically just tries to like fill the space. You can kind of think of it like that. Versus fill equally, it tries to make each arranged subview like the same size and also like fill the space. And then equal spacing is just tries to give equal spacing. So yeah, these are like different ways that you can do. There's more than what I listed here, and each like characteristics of the distribution is a little like nuanced. So definitely like when you're using StackViews, I would say definitely read the documentation so you understand how your stack view is being laid out. Because like if you don't understand and you just write in a random distribution or write in a random alignment and you like just pray that's gonna work and things don't go right, like it definitely helps to read the. There's a lot of good documentation out there, not just the Apple documentation. It's like really good to just read it to really understand, what the library is doing, right? If you're going to use a library, I would suggest reading the documentation. Anyways, so this is what distribution is, and I'll just like go over specifically some other distributions I thought was kind of interesting, or so like one property. So distribution equals spacing. Like what it does is it gives equal spacing to every element, but the way it does that, right, is that it uses each element's intrinsic content size to kind of figure out like what's the size of each element, and then it generates the space, even space after that. So that's what equal spacing does, and so it doesn't like, and you can see that's not always going to use like your minimum spacing value they specified, right? It's just going to make sure that the space between each element is the same. Yeah, and then let me see. Yeah, so then the fill proportionally would kind of resize each item. Basically, like, so it uses the intrinsic content size to figure out like what's the size of each item, and then it kind of proportionally like distributes the extra space between all the items. And then you can see here that you'll be using and tries to keep like the minimum spacing that you specified. So doesn't anyone have any questions about distribution? Or just StackViews in general? Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. I will. Yeah. So then something I want to talk about, like, yeah, I was mentioning this like intrinsic content size. Um, so and that's kind of important to auto layout and is something that is part of like the magic of auto layout. Like I know you guys have when you probably first started using auto layout, like sometimes things wouldn't work right and you'd be like, why is the thing's not working? But like when it does work right, it's pretty cool. Like you just specify a couple like constraints and everything like just generates itself naturally. So like kind of part of that reason why that's like possible, right, is because of intrinsic content size. So every UI element generally has some sort of like intrinsic content size. They have some sort of like size that the library like knows that it is or knows how big it is and uses that to kind of help with the constraints. So so not all elements have an intrinsic content size, but the ones that do are like buttons and labels, right? It's like based, and it's intrinsic content size is based on the amount of text and the font that you use, right? So if you're like typing a label in San Francisco and you type like maybe like 3 letters, right? It's like gonna know how big that label is and use that when you're laying out your views. And so that's kind of like why you could like just specify, if you want to pin a label to like the top left corner, right, you just specify the leading constraint and then you specify the top constraint. You don't really need to specify the label's width or height because just by inputting the text, like the library like knows like what size to make the label. So that's like the pretty cool thing about auto layout. That's something I just wanted to point out that like it's not just like magic, like it's called intrinsic content size, and this is kind of how things work. So some things that don't have intrinsic content size is custom UI views, so or just like UI views in general. They don't have an intrinsic content size in the sense that if you add things to your UI, like if you just create a custom UI view and then you try and use it in a constraint, they're not really gonna the like auto layout like generator is not necessarily gonna know how big that view is, even though yeah you maybe add this subview and this subview right on this corner and this corner, so it means it's like a square this big or something, but like it's not gonna know. Uh, so what you need to do for custom views, and if you use any custom views, right, is to override the intrinsic content size and like manually enter the size. And so you just like enter the width and the height of your custom view, and then your auto layout will start working like properly and how you expect when you use like buttons and labels. So yeah, so that's like intrinsic content size, and it also becomes important with StackViews, right? Because like a lot of StackViews just like automatically laying things out. And they can do that because they know what intrinsically the size is. So does anyone have any questions? Cool. And something else that I want to go over as well that kind of related to StackViews as well is content hugging and compression resistance priorities. And so this is kind of I guess a bit of a side topic. Like you don't need to know this to like build an app, right? Like you don't usually need to change your content hugging and priorities and resistance. Like you don't need to manipulate any of this stuff. But if you want to make your like layout like adaptable to kind of like certain changes in like the view size or just like changes maybe in the text or whatnot, like just more adaptable, like this is definitely like a nice way to kind of refine your layout and really like make it device perfect, right? Like for whatever device, like it's gonna look good. And this comes into play with the Distribution.Fill. So if you remember, I mentioned that earlier when talking about distribution, and basically what it does on a very like high level, it just like fills each item, right, by like the amount, like just tries to fill the space. But specifically, like what it uses to fill the space is the intrinsic content size, but it also uses this property called content compression resistance and content hugging. So like basically what intrinsic fill does, right, or not intrinsic fill, Distribution.Fill does, right, is it just like sizes each item, so it knows what the item size is based on the intrinsic content size. But then since it's trying to like fill the space, right, so it needs to figure out like how like where do I put this extra space, like which view do I put it, And what it uses is, or like if there's a lack of space, right? If like all the items' intrinsic content sizes are bigger than the width of your screen, meaning that they cannot fill the entire, like they can't all be, no, you can't see all the labels right at once. Like some label is going to be truncated. Then you'd have to use like, so if there's a lack of space or there's like leftover space, whatever it is, the stack view is going to be using the items like content compression property and content hugging priority to kind of determine like which one do I shrink, right? Or which one do I like make bigger. And so that's like, and so that can be important, right? If your stack view maybe isn't acting the way you want or things aren't arranging the way you want, and you're like, but I thought stack views are so convenient and why isn't it working? And it's just so much harder. But yeah, so sometimes like sometimes it could be just like the priorities that are like the reason why the stack views are like the way things out the way they do. So kind of like to go more into like what is this priority, right? So I said that this is a priority that kind of determines, how big do you stretch it, or do I stretch this one, right, or do I shrink this one, right? So for that situation when you're doing the fill for distribution. And so basically kind of like these priorities, basically what they are is, so content compression resistance priority, what it like when you kind of like manipulate that, the view with like in the stack view, right, it will kind of go through all its views, and then whichever view has the lowest compression resistance priority will get truncated. And so so it's just like compression resistance is basically, right, just like, how much is it like resistance to being squished, right? How much is resistance to being like a label truncated and going off with like a dot dot dot. Like that's what compression resistance is. And like whoever has the lowest whoever has the lowest value will just get truncated. And then whoever, for content hugging, is kind of a little bit like the opposite. It's like where do I put this extra space, right? Like who gets stretched. And so that's determined with the content hugging priority. So the view with the lowest content hugging priority will get expanded beyond its like intrinsic content size, or its like natural size. And so then in this case, right, these are all views, right? And like I mentioned before, you would have to specify like, and in this case, you would have to specify the length of the size of each view. And in this case, I'm not sure what the size of all the views are, but what the main thing to take away from here is that you can see that these are all views, and therefore you need to, and you're doing the distribution fill, right? So you need to fill the space. And so you can see that the red label has like the lowest content hugging priority because it's the one being stretched. So like it kind of makes your view more adaptable if like, and I'll show an example of making your view more adaptable when I do the demo, but just like this is what distribution, like setting the content hugging priority would do is, well, you would want to lower it, right, to make whatever view that you want to be like stretchable, like stretch. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay. Cool. Yeah, so I'll just like go over the demo. So yeah, so let me just pull it up. So I always feel like a demo is probably good to kind of bring things home, because I could talk about these properties or priorities, but it's kind of hard to kind of understand it unless you see it in real life. So let me just pull up the starter code. So you guys like download it from Piazza. It's under resources, and you can follow along, or you can just watch. I mean, everything will be posted online after lectures. So, okay. Okay. Okay, it's getting smaller. Okay, cool. So you should, let me just make sure. so you want to go to the CHR folder in this demo, and then just go to the view controller. So actually, let me just run this so you guys can actually see, what is going on before I make any changes to code. So yeah, now we can just wait. In the meantime, as we wait, we can just kind of go through what this is. So basically, I just created. So I don't know if you guys looked at the stack view, but I just basically created one main stack view. So it's a vertical stack view, right? So and I made it like the distribution fill proportionally. So that means like you just fill. You try and fill everything, but you fill in a way like relative to each one's like each subview's content size. So that's what fill proportionally does. So this is just one of the view controllers, but I also have a menu, which is also a stack view. But yeah, and then I also added in some margins. So there's something I didn't talk about in the slides. It's kind of like a side thing, but like you can have margins in your views. And basically it just like adds like padding around the edges of your views, which can be nice sometimes. So anyway, so this is just like the demo. So like the CHR with StackViews will pop over to this CHCR view controller, the one right here. And basically you can see like, so just like let's focus on the top part, right? So this is where, this is a situation where your stack view may not be like working the way you want, right? Because like here's a situation where you have a UI text field and then you have a UI label. And if you think about it, right, like you want like if you just look at it, it looks a little awkward, right? And the reason why it looks so awkward is because like the text field is so small and the label is so big. And why do you need a label this big? You should like give the extra space to the text field, right? So, but it's not working. And that's kind of because of the priorities are all the same. So, and I didn't want to give anything away because I want to pose a question to you guys. What do you guys think I should do? Which priority should I be working with? Like, should I be working with content hugging priority? Should I be working with compression resistance priority? Okay. Well, you could have just scrolled down a little bit more, and probably the answer would be pretty obvious. But it's okay. I can scroll down for you guys. So in this case, right, we want to work with content hugging priority, right? So kind of like if we go back to the slides, right? So content hugging priority tells you like, or specifically like the one with the lowest content hugging priority is the one that gets like expanded beyond its intrinsic content size. And so in this case, right, we don't want label to be expanded, right? We want text field to be expanded. So what we need to do is lower the text field's content hugging priority. So, so yeah, does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so basically just uncomment this function, right? And then just go to, so it's content hugging priority. So in this case, right, we want to, set the content hugging priority of the text field. Specifically, we want it to be lower than the label's content hugging priority. So first we get the label's content hugging priority, and so that is dot horizontal, and we're doing it on we're getting the content hugging priority for the horizontal, right? Because these things are being laid out horizontally, so that's why. And then we want it to be lower than labels 1. So right now I set the content hugging priority to the labels content hugging priority, but I want it to actually be lower, so I was like subtract 1, and then just say I want to set it for the horizontal, right, because we're working with the horizontal. And then yeah, and then now everything works the way you want, right? Your text field's bigger, your label's like the size of what it should be, right? It's intrinsic content size, and so basically the text field's being stretched, and this is much more an adaptable review, right? It's like what you want. Like if there's extra space, like you want to give it to the text field. It's just better UI. So another thing that, so then now let's work with the other property, right? And so remember that the other property, so content compression resistance priority is like, it kind of, it's, you use this for truncating or like figuring out which one to truncate, right? With which view to truncate. So basically like, if there's not enough space, right, which of my arranged subviews do I like truncate? You can kind of set that by setting the compression resistance priority. So in this case, we have, so looking here, we have 3 like buttons, and in this case, and you can kind of see it's just like arbitrarily like just truncating the last one. But if you read the titles, right, they say this one's like the least important title. These 2 are important, so you don't want them to be truncated in this very simple case. So what you want to do, right, is basically, so if you go to back to the view controller, right, just like uncomment this line, which is setting the content compression resistance priority for the buttons, and then within your function, right, you want to, so this button is button 1, this button is button 2, this is button 3, so yeah, and what you want to do, right, is kind of lower the, you want to lower the content compression resistance priority of the first button, right, so that it gets truncated, because like that's how these things work. It's just like the lowest one is the one that, you know, gets truncated. So to do that, let's get button 1. So do set content compression resistance priority, and then now we're gonna just get the content compression resistance priority of the other button, right? And then we want it to be lower than button 2, right? We want button 1 to be truncated. So the way we do that is, if I could see beyond my screen, is we subtract by 1. So just lower it by 1, because that's all you really need, right, in a tiebreaker. And then don't forget to do it for horizontal, because all these views are being laid out horizontally. And then if we load the app again, okay, and then you can see that this one's the one with the dots, right? Like it's the one being truncated. So this is also kind of helpful for when you don't have enough screen size, right? Or it can also be helpful, right, when you don't know what the titles are going to be for some reason. Like you're just querying this API and like texts are just coming out, and somehow in your UI you need to like display things in a row, right? But if you know like, oh, this text is like the most important text, like I definitely need to like display these ones, right? And then whatever to like the last one. Like that way you can really have a view that's like really adaptable to kind of like the screen widths, and adaptable to like the data, right? So like even if your data is not perfect, right, you're still going to truncate the least important text. So yeah, that's that. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to our other stuff? Okay, that's good, I guess. Definitely ask me if you have any questions, but anyway, we're just gonna move on to table views, because specifically I want to talk about creating like more dynamic table views. I know, and when we taught table views, we kind of like specified that you had to set the size of your element, right? It was like in the table view delegate or something, size for cell at row at or something like that. And that's like good if all your table views are static, right? So what I'm talking about static is like when all your table views are like a uniform width or height, you kind of know what they all are. Or like they're always going to be the same height no matter what. So like this is an example from the Notes app. So the Notes app, right, is just like you just have like it just shows a preview. Like it's every cell just like its title and then a preview, like a one-line preview. And that's like great. Like that's a really simple like table view, and like, you know, I'm sure y'all can do it. But like it becomes harder, right? Like when your data, like what if you don't want to just show like one line of text? Like what if you want to show like kind of like the whole text, right? Then, but you don't know how much text each note is, so you don't know like what to make each height, right? Like depending on like the data you get back from your like database, right? Like your height of the cell could be like 100, and then the other height of another cell, right, with less text could be like 20. So like, and it's kind of hard to kind of specify that in your table to delegate method where it's like height for row at, right? You just usually just put in like one height for all the rows. So like kind of what I'm talking about in terms of like dynamic text is like this, right? So this is like where your table views cells, so each like each reminder is a cell. They're like different heights, and this is also like user inputted, right? So for reminders text, like I can just like type in whatever I want, and it's gonna be the height of what I typed in. And to really like to do that like with the height for row at is, yeah, basically not very good and not advisable to do, because I like you can do it. Like you could just like have a function that like generates the height based on your text fields, like your text elements, but like it's kind of manual, and there are better things out there, specifically auto layouts. So, like basically, this is actually pretty simple. You guys may have done this before. I definitely I remember posting about this on Piazza, but it was just like one post, and I can't remember if it was private or public. But basically, the solution is auto layout. Like this is why auto layout's so good, is that you can just like make the constraints of your table view cell, and then just add like just kind of specify within your table view, like, oh, I want my table view to have dynamic height. Like I don't know what it is, but the constraints are going to tell you. Like you're just going to have to look at the constraints and know that based on these constraints, like the table view is like this high, and therefore you need to make this cell this high. So that's like what you do, and it's actually pretty nice. So I'm just gonna go through a little demo of that so we can all see how this is going to work. And so let me just figure out where I am. Yeah, so basically, actually I won't do that. Just like pulling up the demo, right? You want to go dynamic height, and then you want to go to post table view cell. But you know, before I go into the code, let me just show you like what it looks like, so you can all see what we're working with. So dynamic height table view is the one you want to work with. Just click that, right? Now you get a dynamic height table view, but it's not dynamic height, right? As you can see, every label, so every cell has two labels, right? It has a title label and then a description label, and then it's just like one line, right? Because labels are usually just one line by default. So like, and then if you also look at, so if you go to the dynamic height table view controller, and we kind of see, if we look at how the height's being determined, right? It's being determined by this like height for row at. So every like cell, table view cell is like this high. You just said it's just gonna be 70, like whatever. And that's, but like what if, you know, like as you can see, like the labels are trailing off, right? So there's definitely more to these labels than like the first, they're more than just one line. And what if you want to show all of them? Like it's, so the way you would do that, right? Well, first we have to make these labels like multi-line, right? So first, these labels are like single line because by default labels are. So let's do that first before we do anything else. So yeah, and as you can see, I've already had the constraints out. They're just like basic constraints, just, you know, pinning stuff to the top and bottom. But basically, here's where I create the labels, and to make a label multi-line, like all you have to do is do title label dot number of lines equals 0, and then you can do description label dot number of lines equals 0, And I just wanted to just say like what number of lines is, so you guys just kind of understand what you're doing versus typing things, because it's easy to type, but it's also good to just read the documentation and know like what the property actually means instead of just copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, which is pretty easy to do. So anyways, so number of lines is the maximum number of lines used for rendering text. So actually, yeah, this you would have to read the documentation to realize that if you put 0, like there is no like max line. So if I put like 2, and that's my label would be max line of 2 instead of 1, which is kind of like default. But if I put 0, there's no max line, and so this label can be like multi-line in terms of the content. Like it can have as many lines as the content or the text of the label has. So let's run it, right? So we just made this label like multi-line. Let's see if it gets a little better. Yeah, so as you can see, it's a little better, right? Like at least the title text isn't running off anymore, right? It's actually like showing all the title text. But the problem is it's not, like you're not able to see the description text, right? It's still trailing off. And the reason for that, right, is if we look back at our dynamic height table view controller, that's because we specified that the table height is supposed to be 70 throughout. But as you can see, sometimes you need more than 70 to kind of display the whole like description text. And so kind of like the way we do that, right, is go back to the slides, right? We already added the constraints to the table view cell. Now we just gotta make our table view like dynamic, right? Make the height dynamic. So we just gotta set a couple properties. So let me just go up there so this is where I initialize the table view, and so this is where I'm gonna make the table view dynamic. So to do that, you kind of set the estimated row height. So just like the row height that they're gonna use as like the baseline, and then obviously use the like your table view is gonna use the constraints that you specify in yourself to also like actually find the actual height of your cell, but this is kind of like the baseline. So usually should be the average, whenever you set estimate row height, should be like the average height you kind of think your cell is. The more accurate, the better, but it's not like, it'll still work like if you don't write in an accurate height. It's also kind of hard to predict like what is the average height of my cells. So yeah, and then basically what you do to make the row height dynamic is all you do is tableview.rowHeight UI tableview automatic dimension. So, and you can see here we're specifying the row height for the table view, so we no longer need this delegate method, right? If we scroll down, that specified the height for the table view. We don't need that anymore, so I'm just gonna comment that out because we've already like set the row height here to be like automatic dimensions, so just like gonna resize to your cell. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. So let's do it. Yeah, so and then as you can see, you click on this, right, like everything is working. Like now your table view like is the height of the like data, the text from, you know, maybe your database or whatever. Like it's like intrinsic, like it just like knows the height. Just because you specified, like all you did was, well, you didn't do it, but I did in this code is just like you specify the constraints, and then you just specify like, oh, I just want the table view to be dynamic height, right? I just gotta set these two properties. Yeah, so there you go. Like, and so it's pretty good, especially if you have data like, you know, just getting text data right from like New York Times or something. Like, you don't know how big the like preview text is or the title is gonna be, but with constraints and dynamic table view heights, you can just have them work the way you want them to. So that's that. Does anyone have questions? Yeah. Yeah, I believe you could probably do that with collection. Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Let me think. Actually, I do feel like you should be able to do it with collection views. Because I know with the collection views, right, you set the CG size, and that's kind of basically like the height for a table view. So it's equivalent. So yeah, I'm like pretty sure you can do it for a collection view. Like it would make sense if you could. So yeah. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, cool. Yeah, so yeah, definitely remember this. Like, don't be, because you could have certainly like going back to this function, like, oh, and I don't know why my commenting this stuff is not working. Anyways, just found that out today. Anyways, so like just going back, I just want to mention like you don't need to do the whole two like properties, right? Like you could have very well calculated a function in here and be like, okay, based on the text, right? Based on like if I do like you'd probably could have some formula, right? Like post dot based on like data dot row, right? Like dot description based on the description text, right? And like maybe I multiply it by 4 or something, like or something. Like you could just usually like you could generate a formula like in your height for row at and like generate the height, but that's like really manual and you don't need to do that at all. It's like stuff is built out there to just use. Like, so definitely just that's why auto layout's good, right? Like if you're using frames, like you'd have to like generate some sort of formula to be like, oh, for a dynamic height cell, you'd be like, oh, it's like 2 times this label plus this one plus the height of this label plus the padding plus yeah. So like it's a lot. It's just too much work. So don't do that and do the really simple way where you just set 2 properties. So yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna like move on to the next thing. Oh, already done with that. So reusing cells. So this is something I wanted to talk about, just kind of like mention, because I think a lot of times, especially when you like first start with like iOS and use table views and use collection views, is like you always see people like type in like DQ reusable cell, right? And I just get the cell and I just manipulate the cell, right? And I use and return it in cell forward index path. Like kind of like what I want to emphasize is that like you should definitely understand what DQ reusable cell does, because like a lot of like bugs are because you're reusing the cell. And before I get too much into it, does anyone want to tell me what DQ reusable cell does? Okay, that's okay. That's what I guess that's what the instructors are here for. Just tell you, what it is, so you know, and you don't just like write code and not know what you're writing, because that can just definitely just make things harder for you later on when you're trying to debug your code. So, anyways, so what TableView.DQ reusable cells does is like, and this was mentioned briefly in the TableView lecture, but I just want to re-emphasize, is like basically like if you recall, like, so I'm just gonna go to a picture of a TableView, right? So if you recall, right, you only see a certain amount of table views like on screen at once. But you definitely have more, like usually have more than just like whatever you see on screen. Like usually you gotta scroll with a table view, right? So, but what, and so like one way, right, to think of like one way you could have done like, or what Apple could have done, right, is create basically a table view cell for every element in your data set. So like in your model, right, every element in your array, if you had 100 elements, it would create 100 table view cells. But that's kind of like inefficient, right? Like that would take a lot of memory, especially if your data is like really intensive, right? It's not just 100 elements, but it's like 1,000,000 elements. Like that's a lot. Like it could be a lot, right? And then if you're creating an object for each one, that's like very like memory heavy. So to be more efficient, like what DQ reusable cell does is, or like what Apple does, right, is they just create enough cells so that you can see all the cells that are visible, right? Enough cells so that you can see all the visible cells. And then when you're scrolling, right, they're reusing those same cell objects to display the other cells. So every time you scroll, you're not creating more cells. Like if you scroll down your Facebook feed, it's not like new cells are being created. You're using the same cells. You're just like putting in different data into it. So that's like something I just really want to emphasize, because that can really help you when debugging for table view bugs. So does everyone understand that? Okay, definitely remember that, because it's like reuse is kind of a really great thing, but it just can be kind of confusing when you like first start out. So yeah, so I think I kind of said what reuse does. And then sometimes when you reuse the cell, right, like Therefore, when you're reusing a cell, you need to make sure that your cell is in a proper state to be reused every time you dequeue it, right? Every time you do dequeue reusable cell, like you're dequeuing like a cell that may or may not have already been used. It could be a new cell, or it could just been a cell that you haven't, or a cell you've already used before, right? But you're now using it for a different data object. And so you want to just make sure your cell is in a proper state before you reuse it. And that's why there's a function that you can override in your cell class called prepare for reuse. And that can just ensure that your state of your cell, like when you're like, before you like reuse your cell, like you may want to clear or just like reset the state of your cell. And yeah, this kind of sounds a little abstract just talking about it. So that's why I'm going to show you guys a specific example. And although generally you can think of state as like the properties of an object, and so in your cell case, that would probably just be like the subviews. So let me just show you an example because just talking about things that are a little abstract. Okay, so let's just pull up the prepare for reuse examples. So you just click on this button, right? So this is a cell with, or a table view, right, with just like labels, like one label's on the right side, left side, and one label's on the right side, and it's blue. Like, okay, yeah, it was kind of random, but like what's happening here are, well, everything looks fine, right? So everything looks great, right? But then when you start scrolling, like weird things are happening, right? Like looks like there's being like multiple labels, but why? Well, that's because you're reusing the same cells, right? And if you don't reuse them properly, you're pretty much gonna have stuff like this where you scroll, everything looks fine when you first run it, and then you scroll and everything messes up. So, yeah, so definitely, so let me just like kind of go into what this table view is doing. So let's so all those like when you have these kind of bugs, like you should look at how you're actually like creating your table view. Like, so just like so first things first, start at cell forward index. So like okay, so you can see in my cell forward index, I'm just like dequeuing a cell. If I don't have a cell, right, I'm just gonna create a new cell. Actually, sorry, this is not the right one. It's okay, they're all like the same anyways, but let me just move to the right one so you guys don't get confused. Okay, back to the right one. So yeah, so if you go to cell for row at index path, right, what you're doing here, you're just dequeuing a cell. I've already registered a cell with like this custom table view cell, right? It's called label table view cell because each element is a label. And then if your cell's nil, right, you're just creating a new table view cell. And then here I'm like setting the cell, right? I'm getting the data, and then I'm gonna set the data. So, and if we kind of look into what this does, you can see that I'm just creating a UI label. I'm creating a highlight view. So I'm creating the label, the highlight view, and then I'm setting the text of the label to what I expected, to the data that I got. I'm also setting the background color based on the data that I got from the label, from the data element. And then I'm I add the subviews, and then I activate the constraints. So there's like different constraints, right? Because the left one is on the blue one's on the right side, and like the red one's on the left side. So I have different constraints for each, and you can kind of look at how they're made. But basically, that's just like high level what's happening, and it looks all fine, right? Like it's like what you expect to do, just like do all this stuff, and it's like seems fine, right? So then what's going on? Well, if you notice, right? So let me just like pull it up again. So if you notice, something specific is happening, right? If you scroll, it seems like there's multiple labels, but I only added one. So, can anyone tell me what's going on? Okay. Well, you are reusing the cell, right? So, basically, like, what is happening, right, is you're reusing this cell. So, like, kind of think of it like maybe the first time, right, you got a fresh cell. Like, this gets called, right? You have a fresh cell, and you set the data of the cell. That's like what happens, right, when you basically Oh, wow. I'm not using simulator is annoying. Okay, so basically, right, when you click this, you got like fresh cells. And like these fresh cells are just like, and you just called set data on these fresh cells, right? And then you set up the data, and then you add the subviews, and you set up the constraints on these fresh cells. But, right, when you're scrolling, you already created all these cells, so you don't need to create any more. You're just reusing the same cells. But if you notice, what you're doing every time you DQ a cell, right, you're calling set data. And what set data is doing every time is it's adding subviews, right? So what's going on is that you're adding a label subview every single time you like DQ the cell. And so that's why you see multiple labels over and on top of each other. And it just looks really weird and looks terrible. So that's like what is happening. And that's like kind of like a typical error that one might get when reusing cells. And the solution, or one of the solutions, this is not necessarily the only solution, but one solution is overriding prepare for reuse, right? So before my cell gets reused, I'm going to prepare it for reuse, and you can just like write whatever you want to prepare for reuse. And so what the problem here, right, is that you kept adding subviews on top of others, like subviews that already existed. So what you want to do is kind of remove the old subviews, right? So you could do like label. So what you want to do, like before you reuse the cell, right, you want to remove the old subviews from the bottom. And so that like when you add the subview, right, you're not adding it on top of old subview. Does that like make sense to everyone? Yeah. Cool. Definitely ask if you have a question. Like, I think reuse is like kind of confusing because just like nobody really talks about it. I feel like, especially in like iOS, like when you just read up guides, they always just say like, oh, and then just DQ the cell, and things just work. But it's good to just know why things work the way they do. But yeah, so basically what you want to do, right, is remove the superviews. Like you want to remove them from the superview, so that when you like create when you add the new labels that you created, the new highlight view that you created, you won't be adding on top of the old subviews. And so this prepare for reuse basically gets called like before you reuse the cell, right? Before DQ reusable cell returns you a cell that's you already like used. So it's going to be called there. So then I'm just going to run it and see if everything is okay. Yes, now if we go, everything looks fine, but that happened before. Everything looked fine, and then you scroll and everything messed up. But anyways, and then you keep scrolling, right? Oh, now you're properly like reusing your cells, right? Nothing is like, none of this weird label stuff where labels like overlay each other, right? It's because every time you reuse the cell, every time DQ reuse of the cell is being called, right? You, if you go into your cell class, right, are calling prepare for reuse is being called, and you're kind of resetting the state, right? The state of this cell is its like label and its highlight view. You're resetting the state, so then when you use the cell, right, when you set the data, like you'll just won't be adding subviews like on top of old subviews. So that's like so that's just something I wanted you guys to know because it's really important for table views because you're always going to be DQing this table views, and it can be kind of confusing because nobody like thinks like that, or I don't like. I think when you like think of creating a table view, you only think about when it's like fresh state, right? When it's like empty, and like I'm just gonna like add the subviews and constraints, like cool. And then like you never think about like what happens when you reuse the cell. So it's like definitely like this is a definitely you should think about like that, like what is the state of my cell, like, and once you figure out like the state of your cell, you can kind of figure out like what you need to do and prepare for reuse, or if you even need to like prepare for reuse, right? Is there a way you can just change the methods, right, and kind of set up your cell in a way so that you don't need to override prepare for reuse, but it reuses itself in a well way. So yeah, this is like for this code, right? Like I need to do prepare for reuse, but if I wrote this code a different way, right, I wouldn't have to like, or actually, yeah, I wouldn't have to use prepare for reuse. So it's like it's all kind of dependent on your code. Like this may not always be the solution, but this is one of the solutions, especially for like if your cell is kind of like complex or really dynamic, has a lot of like dynamic properties, like it changes based on the data very easily. So does anyone have any questions about this? Or any questions in like in general? Okay. Well, that's the end of this lecture. Hope you guys um, learned a bit because I feel like a lot of these topics are all little side things that maybe we didn't get to, but it's just like really just here to kind of enhance your understanding. Because you can implement a really cool app, but if it doesn't work, like if you don't write it well, it's gonna be really hard to build on top of. Or that when you build on top of, right, you're gonna have all these bugs, and you have to figure out these bugs on top of trying to create new features. Like, so you just want to just kind of make sure I understand that what you guys are doing, and don't just like copy and paste from Stack Overflow because it's really easy to do with iOS because like so many resources out there just like tell you what the answer is. But really, just definitely just remember to read the documentation of your libraries, right? Like it just like when you're using a library, you should know, people. You should read the documentation of people who created the library, so you really understand like what they're doing and what is going on. So that's just like a main lesson. Definitely like I hope your projects are going well. I'm excited to see all of them on Sunday. So good luck. You guys are all free to go.